Welcome once again to the Chapter 49 podcast. Today is Thursday, June the 2nd, 2022. We're recording this in the early afternoon, Central Indiana time. We welcome you to our Chapter 49 podcast. Once again, we appreciate the fact that you've chosen to join us and taken the time to do so, whether you're watching us on video or you are listening via the audio podcast. And Duncan Giles, our chapter president, is back as always. And Duncan, I looked at our numbers the other day. The last 3 weeks, we've seen an uptick in our video views. So for some reason, people actually want to see our faces.
And if nothing else scares people today, that really should right there. Because that frightens the heck out of me.
People are choosing to watch the video. You know, if I were them, I'd much rather hear the audio, but that's just me. Okay. Just want to say a couple of words. I mean, I think that what we're seeing just in the last few days on mass shootings, you know, one in an elementary school of all places, now the most recent before we record this, in a hospital in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm not going to I could go on a rant and I won't. I'm just going to leave my comments at this. I think everyone in every workplace, and IRS is a workplace like any other, should simply do the very basic sorts of things that NTU and management has always encouraged them to do. You know, be on the lookout, watch for suspicious activity, and report it. I think we all need to be a part of keeping our workplaces safe.
Absolutely correct, Larry. That's, you know, it's a tragedy that these kinds of things continue to happen. And all we can do at this point is just be, like you said, be aware. If you see something suspicious, say something. It may be nothing, but it may be everything. So, you know, report it even if you think it's a little bit out of whack.
Yeah, and you know, we've all worked in these workplaces, most of us. There are a few new people, but in Indiana particularly, you know, we haven't had a lot of hirings, although there are efforts, and we'll talk more about that later in the podcast. But I do think most of us have worked in these workplaces for a long time, and you know what's normal and what's not. If something doesn't look right, you should report it. And I think that's the message that you have given people in our chapter for a long time. And I simply want to do this as a reminder. And rather than getting into the whole issue of how to prevent shootings, I think we could talk for hours about that and probably not make any difference, sadly. So we're going to get into our issues for today. You know, COVID, you know, we started this podcast a little more than 2 years ago in the midst of the worst of COVID. COVID had just descended upon all of us and, of course, the federal government as well. And we were on, remember, what was it? Weather and safety leave. Remember that when everybody got at home? It was so new, nobody knew what to do. So they simply paid people to stay home until we all figured out what to do next. I mean, that's how serious COVID was at the time. No vaccines and very few, if any, treatments that were viable or able to help people. Well, COVID has not gone away. We do have the vaccines. We have a little better way to treat people than before. But, you know, Duncan, there are still people nationally who are sadly hospitalized and dying. Now, an example is where I live in Fishers, Indiana, which is a suburb of Indianapolis of about 100,000 people. We are one of the highest vaccination rates of any place in Indiana, very high percentage of vaccinations. So we've seen an uptick, gone from low to medium in our health department measure as far as COVID and its spread, but we have only seen a very small increase in the hospitalizations, which is a very good thing. But we are seeing localities where COVID levels are beginning to spike. So what does that mean for the IRS workplace in those local areas?
Yeah, that's when it starts to go from low to medium and especially medium to high. That's when things are going to kick in. If it's going to medium, those folks who have not been what IRS calls fully vaccinated are going to need to be tested. And that's going to involve, you know, getting a test kit from this company that the IRS is contracted with, you know, setting up a time to do it, and then, you know, doing it in front of a camera proctor, so to speak, so they can observe you taking the test and go from there. If it goes too high, where sadly a lot of our locations outside of Indiana are starting to go to, then everybody's going to be required to wear a mask regardless of vaccination status. So unfortunately, this is not going away. The COVID strain continues to mutate, and it's going to continue to mutate. I'm very happy, as you mentioned, that it doesn't seem to be as severe as it was or as deadly, but it's still out there and it's still impacting a lot of people. So take every precaution that you can so that you don't catch this. It's no fun for anybody, as you can well attest.
And at this point, do we know whether there are any places in Indiana that are going to have to, let's say, go to a mask mandate again over this? There are some places in the country where that's happening. Is that, are we close or at that place in Indiana anywhere you're aware?
No, we are not. There have been a couple that have gone to medium, as you indicated, up in your area. It's gone to a medium. So far in Indiana, we've not gone back to high risk, but that could change any week. So that's, the SCR organization monitors that and changes that designation every Friday. So it's something to be aware of. I'm not seeing a ton of them that are saying, okay, yeah, everything's great. It's continued. You're starting to see more and more go from that low to medium, and, check with your, on the IRS source, it has that information of what your particular state and areas level is at this point.
And you mentioned one factor involved here, and that's whether you are fully vaccinated. Now, we've had vaccinations in many different ways. There have been 2 boosters. If you had the anything but J&J, there are 2 boosters that you could take. I've had both of them. Not everybody has. So I guess, what is the definition, under the IRS definition anyway, of full vaccination?
IRS definition of fully vaccinated is going by the executive order, which is the 1 shot of J&J or the 2 shots of the Moderna or Pfizer. The booster is something that is highly recommended, but is not mandatory to be considered fully vaccinated, which is not a term that the CDC uses.
Correct, but you're right. The executive order did, and so that's where the disconnect is there. But I think that at least we do have a definition. You must have 1 J&J or 2 of the other approved vaccines. Boosters are recommended. At my age, boosters are pretty much accepted. If you don't get it, you're taking a lot of risk. So, yeah, my wife just got hers the other day. And you might have mild symptoms the day after, but it was nothing serious for either one of us. Since we're talking about COVID, let's bring up something else related to that. We've talked about this recently in our podcast. This vaccine mandate has been in the courts. One judge did strike down the vaccine mandate the president had ordered for federal employees. The Federal Appeals Court, a 3-judge panel in that appeals court, ruled 2-1 that no, the president does have the authority to do this. It's been held up in the courts by, the usual, pleadings that go on. Now we're at a juncture, based on what I've read in a couple of articles I've seen online from some reputable sources that follow federal employee issues, that it is possible that if the Federal Appeals Court says that we're not going to have the entire appeals court judge, there's like several judges, more than 3, for the entire appeals court in New Orleans, if the decision is that now we're not going to hear the case at the full court, as soon as June the 10th, there could be a vaccine mandate in place. Now, of course, the Supreme Court could always issue a stay. That's kind of rare, but it could happen, I guess. But assuming there's no stay from the Supreme Court, if the full appeals court in New Orleans decides not to hear this case and let that 3-judge federal panel ruling stand, we could see the vaccine mandate come back as soon as June 10th, if there are no other delays. So the question then comes up, is IRS ready to handle the vaccine mandate if it becomes effective under this executive order on June the 10th?
I think I can fairly say with a lot of confidence that the IRS is as well prepared as just about every other federal agency is for this.
which is not prepared at
No,
all.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. They're not ready for this whatsoever. Yeah, it's one of those things that at this point they've been told, OPM, the Office of Personnel Management, has basically told agencies at this point, there is no, until the courts are finished ruling, there is no mandate enforcement. Now, like you said, if the appeals court declines to hear it with the full appeal court and the Supreme Court doesn't intervene, then it's okay, we're going to have to get ready. How fast agencies, including the IRS, are going to be able to gear up is anybody's guess. My guess is not very quick. Right now, the folks are concentrating on hiring. They're not concentrating their efforts on what to do about the vaccine mandate. There are all those reasonable accommodations that have been sitting there for people, either medical or religious, to not have the vaccine that would still have to be looked at. So it would take, this organization is not known for being able to turn on a dime. And I don't think that would happen in this case either. I think it would take some time for it to gear up in that eventuality.
And in the meantime, people will be working in the workplace, vaccinated or not. Is that the way it's going to work?
I would believe so. Yes, that would be my guess.
Okay, so if you've got a pending reasonable accommodation, let's say for religious reasons, and it hasn't been acted upon and you're not vaccinated, you still come into the workplace, right?
That would be my understanding until there's a ruling on that. I don't know if they'd sit there and do provisionals or not. I'm not sure they know at this point. And when I say they, it's the high ups at the IRS. This is not an NTEU issue. This is an IRS issue and other federal government agencies issues on what they have to do on how to proceed with this. So we at NTU, locally and nationally, can discuss impact and implementation, but not the actual rollout of this. So it could prove interesting if we got a sudden decision saying the mandate is back in effect.
And yeah, you make a very good point. I mean, the agency has to act, and then NTEU would react unless the agency brings us in. And in recent years, we have not seen that. They call that pre-decisional involvement. Well, we haven't seen a whole lot of that, have we?
At time, yeah. In previous years, there has not been. The last couple, at times, there has been. I would hope that the IRS leadership would reach out to Tony Reardon, our national president, Doreen Greenwald, our national vice president, to have these preliminary discussions about this, because it's something that could be it's not going to be smooth regardless, but the less of a cluster hoo-ha that it could be, the better for everyone, I think.
All right. So what I'm hearing you say, well, let me put it this way. And to be fair, and you've touched on this earlier, based on what I've read, IRS is not an outlier. Almost every federal agency is in the same boat. They're just not ready. They I think, are assuming that this will be delayed further in the courts. And the articles I'm reading are, well, it's possible, but it's also very possible June 10th, as early as June 10th, this could happen. So we're watching this. NTEU will continue to keep you updated on this in our various modes of communication, this podcast, and our Facebook page, which is NTEU Chapter 49, Indiana. And if you need a link to that, get to Duncan Giles. He'll be glad to give you the link to our newest page, because the old one had to move for reasons we're not going to get into. By the way, I see that Sheryl Sandberg has left the job as head of Meta, formerly known as Facebook. So
I didn't know if it was her or Mark Zuckerberg that had it out for us.
Somebody did, and but it is what it is. Oh well. Moving on to another issue, and you've talked about hiring. We've known that the people in submission processing, with this huge paper inventory, desperately trying to hire, places like Kansas City and some others around the country, Austin, I think Ogden. There are several places where IRS is trying to hire submission processing people. Just about every way they can. They've had job fairs, they've outreached in a number of different ways. But now I think the The service is also seeing that in accounts management, the telephone assister cadre is now, they're seeing some warning signs there. There are just not enough people to answer the phones. So accounts management is now ramping up its hiring. Explain what's going on there.
Yeah, we're at a level where maybe 1 in 5, maybe a little bit more overall for the fiscal year of taxpayers are able to get through. And that's just simply horrible. But it is what it is because we haven't been able to do the hiring. And so now they are trying to do hiring in every single post of duty that has an accounts management function across the country. They're going to be holding virtual job fairs online several times in the month of June to try and drum this up. They're hoping to get several thousand people over the next 2 years to join the ranks of accounts management, which has traditionally been a foot in the door in the IRS, to try and beef up the phone lines so we can get some sort of level of service that would be acceptable for all of us. Because to be honest with you, the executives don't like the low level of service either. Nobody does. Congress doesn't. We don't. The administration doesn't. Nobody does. But we have to have the bodies to increase that.
Very well said. And I do think that this is a challenge for the management to be able to hire an accounts manager. I mean, submission processing, it's not easy, but it's a pretty rote job. You're processing, stapling, you're bringing paper in and out. I mean, some people do make decisions and evaluations. Others are just moving the paper through. In accounts management, you've got to use some judgment. You're taking a phone call in and trying to figure out what to do with it. So it does take a little time, training and coaching to get somebody up and ready.
And to compound that, we're also hiring as seasonal instead of permanent, which, takes its toll because most people from the outside, if they're not familiar with the organization, look at this and go, seasonal. Well, I don't want a job that lasts 6 months. I want a job that's year round. So, they don't know that, our seasonals have been working darn near year round for several years. They don't understand that. And then you've got the pay. If you can go down the street and start at a Wendy's at $17 an hour in some places, why would you want to go and do something that's much tougher and more complex? And it is involves a little bit more having to have a tougher skin because of the nature of the calls coming in for the last year or so, the last year or two, to do that with the IRS. So it's a tough road to hoe for the folks that are doing the hiring. They are trying different things. I will give them that. They're trying different things that they can think of. So but it's still going to be very difficult to do with those constraints I just mentioned.
Well, I say one thing, Duncan. I do remember talking to you while you were serving on the National Agreement Committee. You were on the bargainers on the union side when the national agreement was bargained. I know that NTEU put forth some proposals where current employees would get a bonus for recruiting somebody new. Whatever happened to that?
I believe it is still in effect. Management went ahead and did their own program because we couldn't come up with parameters that we thought fit everything. I think there is a side letter on that, which means we did come to some sort of agreement. It's not in there, but it's basically somebody has to refer you from the start. You might receive up to $250 once they've been there 6 months and another $250 after they've been there a year. So it's not a huge amount of money, but it's out there. But you weigh that with a lot of people going, I'm not sure I want to be here. Do I want to, have my, and it's not open to your family. So it's only open to friends. Do I want to tell my friends that I want, to do this?
Very good point. You may lose a friend over this. You may gain $500 if somebody stays a year, but you may lose a friend. No, but in all honesty, I just wanted to know if that program was right. I know you'd mentioned there were some efforts my management to do that with some input from IRS, from NTU to IRS, and I know that you could not reach agreement in the national agreement. So at least there's something out there. It's not a huge incentive, but it is there. Now, I think coupled with hiring is this whole issue of retention, because and you've mentioned before that this was a very big issue that was brought up by the union at the national agreement bargaining table, that the management was bent on making sure they could hire quickly and have as streamlined a system as possible. And NTU was not against that if certain safeguards were in there. But now, the point was made at the table by the union, you have to retain these people. You can hire all the people you want, but if they're not retained, then there's no retention to speak of. Then you're just, kicking the can down the road. You've still got the same problem. And I know that the national union officials and national officials of IRS had a recent meeting on this issue. Do you think any headway was made in retention? I mean, I can go on my rant. I went on a previous podcast as a former manager about retention and how I think it's within management's ability to improve that. And I haven't seen any indication that there's been anything done. So is there hope on the horizon, or are we kind of stuck where we are?
That's the $64,000 question, Larry. Huge issue to our national folks. Tony Reardon, Doreen Greenwald, our national director of negotiations, Ken Moffitt, head of field operations, Dan Casper, down to every single chapter president that I know of. And I've had discussions with many of them on this. We are all very, very, very concerned about, these new people coming in, and there are way too many of them going right back out the door in a short amount of time, because there's not enough coaching, there's not enough mentoring, there's not enough willingness among a lot of managers. The majority of managers in the IRS are great. I will say that they're great. They understand what they need to do. They're willing to help. They want people to be on board. But we do still have a sizable minority who feel that it's their job to drive out people that don't fit. And it's just become such a huge, huge issue, because apparently they're having either a direct or indirect impact on these new hires. We try and get numbers on retention for different divisions. And you and I were talking earlier this week about something that happened during the Vietnam War called the 5 o'clock Follies, where the news conferences would be giving out information that reporters finally were just like, this has no basis in reality, so we're not even listening to it. And some of the numbers that I've heard given from executives, either to national, NTU national, or to me personally, I call BS on, because I know that it's much higher than they're saying. I know the percentage is much higher. And it's a huge, huge issue. We bring these people in, we spend money to do it. We know that we need people, and yet we drive them out. And that's not even counting the cost of the training that we're doing, much less, the recruiting efforts and things of that nature. So the IRS must do a better job on retaining folks that are coming in, screening them, make sure that you're getting people that are the right fit for the right jobs, then hiring them and giving them the help they need so they can succeed. The job's not going to be right for everybody. You're always going to have some fallout. That's understood. But the numbers that we're seeing, and again, I understand it's a pandemic. We've been training from home. It is absolutely not ideal, but it's still way, way, way too much of a fallout that we're having percentage-wise.
And I'll mention once again that we are having issues with our video. The audio is fine, but the video is freezing on occasion, and sometimes what Duncan is saying doesn't match up with his voice, and what you're seeing and what he's saying don't match up. So I apologize for that. It's just a connection problem that we're still struggling with. I want to talk about something that always happens when the workload is absolutely out of sight. We've seen this happen before, but never to the extent we see it today. In Taxpayer Advocate Service, we're seeing this in a quite radical way, but it's happening elsewhere, particularly in the collection division of compliance, where the revenue officers are given huge caseloads and inventories. We've also seen this in examination where the audits are done, where the people working these are just given unrealistic expectations on their caseloads, or just the amount of work they have been assigned. When that happens, Duncan, what advice do you give employees?
Basically, let management know exactly what you're doing. Okay, if management has priorities, ask them to list out the priorities 1 through 8, and you'll take care of whatever number you can hit 1 through 5 during an 8-hour workday. But no employee, none, should have to be giving what we call love time, working off the clock to try and keep up with their inventory. And we know for a fact that this happens, as you mentioned, in tax. Our folks in Taxpayer Advocate have ridiculous caseloads, and they're just, because of the way that they're set up, they're saying they can't do anything about it, which I don't agree with, but that's neither here nor there at this point. Collection, exam, you can't expect to hit your program numbers, to hit your expectations, to hit things that are in the IRM, when you have a heck of a lot less people doing the work that used to be done by 20 to 30% more just a few years ago. The work continues to come in and increase, but your numbers that are working them aren't matching that increase, so therefore it's buried. So we try and tell people, if you're starting to get dinged and you're doing your flat level best during your workday to keep up, if you're getting dinged for not making your contacts, or not contacting a taxpayer, or not doing a visitation when you need to be doing it, or something of that nature, not touching a case in a certain amount of days. If this is due to excessive inventory, let your manager know. If your manager is not sympathetic, contact your union chapter, because we've seen this time and again, where we've been told nationally, look, we're just trying to, we have to assign the work. We're not dinging people on it. We want to make sure that they can do as much as they can do, but we're not going, we know they're overloaded, but we're not going to punish them for it. But if you start to hit where it's starting to punish you, i.e. your evaluation, documentation, things of that nature, outside of your control, as most of this is, you shouldn't be held responsible for it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Duncan. Again, you were a little, we missed a little bit of what you said, but I think we caught everything that was important there. And bottom line is, you check with the NTEU if you feel you're given an unrealistic expectation on the amount of work you've been assigned. And I know at the national level that the National Union has spoken many times with the Taxpayer Advocate's Office, and we think we've reached some kind of an agreement at the national level, and it doesn't always filter down locally, does it?
That's the problem. A lot of times these issues are worked at a very high level, and and there's agreement there. But by the time it gets down to the second or frontline manager, it's just gone, and the employees are the ones that suffer.
Let's talk about an issue we've discussed before. It gets hoteling, and again, it's not the IRS putting people up in hotels. Hoteling is about sharing space and not having your own desk, so to speak, with so much telework going on. If you are teleworking, you will probably be sharing a desk with someone, if not now, sometime in the future, especially with hiring going on and with new hires not even eligible for telework for at least a year and maybe longer. So we're dealing with issues of space, the amount of space IRS has for people to do their work. What's going on with that?
Yeah, this is something that is almost a continual discussion going on with the different posts of duties across the country. How many people are you putting in there? How many desks do you have? How many people are actually doing frequent telework? Because if you're doing frequent telework, contractually, you do not have the right to your own individual desk. You are going to be desk sharing. Now, in a lot of parts of the country, you're not having to share a desk at this point because we've got the space. But as you mentioned, as we hire more people, or as we go and look at different space rent reductions of that nature, that could change. So there could be a lot of desk sharing for folks in the future. And we want to make sure everybody's aware of that it could be up to 3-to-1 ratio or more.
Oh, yeah. And I think that the service is under tremendous pressure budget wise to lessen space wherever they can do that. And that's just one more ingredient as to why this is likely to happen soon if it hasn't happened where you work.
And that's one of the things that we've been emphasizing. Until it's needed, nobody should have to desk share. There are certain posts of duties across the country, and we have one in our northern part of our state in Maryville, Indiana, where there is desk sharing going on, hoteling, because of space constraints and the number of people. But if you have an equal number or more desks available than you do employees, even if they're frequent teleworking, they shouldn't need to be desk sharing at this point.
Okay, Duncan, final comments.
I continue to feel sorry for folks who are the victims of violence that they are not any sort of part of, whether it's in the Ukraine, whether it's mass shootings, whatever it is. Folks who are uninvolved in anything, who didn't want it, didn't ask for it, didn't do anything to deserve it, are being, having this happen to them. And we need to take steps, whatever those steps might be, to try and reduce that, whether it be over in the Ukraine, whether it be here in the US, to try and reduce these tragedies, because that's what they are. They're absolute tragedies that should be preventable, or at least greatly reduced.
And let me just say one thing. I always love the summer. Summer's a good time of year, in my opinion. But what I would like people to do is please be careful this summer. Take the regular safety precautions. A lot of people are out in the water. Make sure that you are adhering to all of the safety precautions that are given to you by people who know the best. We want you to stay there. We want our employees and our families to stay around, our viewers and listeners to be there. So we don't want to lose any of you. And we definitely want you to stick around and be with us for our next edition of the Chapter 49 podcast, which we hope will be next week if all goes well. Duncan Giles, thank you very much. Always good to talk to you. Again, we have the Chapter 49 podcast. It's available on YouTube. Just search for Duncan Giles. There's more than one. Just check for all the video feed is Chapter 49 podcast. You can subscribe to Duncan's YouTube channel, and you'll be notified whenever we do have a new podcast that's been posted. Audio wise, just look for a podcast by Larry Lanna, Lannan, on just about any platform where you find podcasts, and you'll find all the podcasts I produce. I produce a number of them. The Chapter 49 podcast will be on that list. So once again, we appreciate you being here. Please be safe and be kind.